Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Appreciate you taking a few minutes this evening to attend our next Weather Explorer series talk. As we get into the colder months again here, we're planning on kind of spinning these back up like we did last winter. And so we're always looking for topics. We'll probably, hit on some winter topics. I never got to the topic of tornadoes this year, and I didn't think this time of year would be quite appropriate for it, but we will certainly visit that in the spring. So today I just thought we would do a little introduction to uh, the National Weather Service's organization. Again, my name is Todd Shea. I'm the warning coordination meteorologist with the La Crosse National Weather Service. And while I'm not going to go into too many specifics about what we do here at the La Crosse office, a little bit I will, because that will be in an upcoming webinar that we'll be doing. This is going to be more of a kind of a big picture look of what the National Weather Service is about. We work closely with different groups out there, and different people have different knowledge of our organization, but just kind of wanted to go over the big picture because I'm not sure everyone has a feeling of what we do in the National Weather Service all the time. So I don't know if all of you got a chance to see, for some of you that had registered ahead of time, I did send out a little registration or a little question, I should say, earlier today, just asking in one word, which I know is kind of tough, just one word, but what do you think the National Weather Service does? And I had a variety of answers, but most people kind of talked about the forecasts or forecasting. Some people use the word warnings or severe weather, and one person even said study, which I thought was good, very insightful too. But I think this kind of illustrates how I think what a lot of people think we do is just, we just look at the weather and we put warnings out, which is certainly one of the more important things we do, but there's a lot that goes into that. And that's kind of where it's interesting to look at the whole organization of the National Weather Service here. So in case you weren't familiar, we are, of course, a federal agency. And as a federal agency, we are under the Department of Commerce. We're under the Department of Commerce because, again, our information is used to protect and boost the economy of the country in aspects of forecasts and warnings and things like that. So we are under the Department of Commerce, and within the Department of Commerce, you have what many of you have heard of the phrase NOAA before, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And within NOAA, then, there are different agencies, and the National Weather Service is just one of those agencies under NOAA. So you can see kind of our different different tiers of government here under the Department of Commerce, and then you have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and then we are within that as the National Weather Service. But there are different organizations under NOAA, like the National Ocean Service, and under Department of Commerce, you have the census agencies and things like that, among others. So lots of different groups within this branch of the government. But as far as the National Weather Service goes, again, when people think about what we do, you think about how you get your weather. You see it on TV or radio. Some of you, now get alerts on your phones. You might have heard of the phrase NOAA Weather Radio. You might have weather apps that generate weather forecasts for you or pass along severe weather information to you. But again, there is a lot of other stuff that goes into what the National Weather Service is about and what we do. So it's kind of that proverbial tip of the iceberg, if you will. There's a lot that goes into the weather warnings, the forecasts, the monitoring, things like observations, which we'll talk about here this evening. Like our radar networks and our upper air weather balloons. We have national centers out there that all kind of support this. There's weather forecasts like what I'm in here tonight, that generate local forecasts, but we also do local support. And then you have the whole water side of things with river forecast centers and drought and flood warnings, things like that. So there's a lot that goes on in the National Weather Service that you may have never known about. And that's where this talk this evening will kind of hopefully highlight some of those aspects. So when you talk about the National Weather Service, it's not just the La Crosse National Weather Service. It's not just the National Hurricane Center or anything like that. It's an organization that has its tentacles, if you will, in a lot of different areas that all have to do with water, the air, climate, and when we talk about air, weather. We also deal with space weather. Like some of the areas around the region last night, we're lucky enough to see the Northern Lights. And again, space weather is an element of the National Weather Service as well. So whether it be monitoring for floods or droughts, we have tsunami warning centers, or producing aviation forecasts to keep the aviation community safe. And so they know what to expect on takeoff and arrivals, things like that. The National Weather Service is involved with all these different aspects. So overall, the Weather Service has a history behind it, 150 years now, if not more. And we have roughly 168 different operational units. And remember, we operate 24 hours a day. We're always monitoring the weather, producing computer weather models, taking observations, you name it. So when you look at the number of people that are in the field, if you will, from the National Weather Service, which is a huge majority, and all of the information that goes out each year, whether it be forecasts or warnings, a lot of information. If you kind of cut that down by the US population, our agency estimates that it only costs taxpayers about $3.50 a year to get all of this information and this idea of national security and public safety when it comes to monitoring weather and putting warnings out. Now you can see from some of these slides as well, some of the history. The Weather Bureau, if you will, or what started the National Weather Service, actually started back in the 19th century, 1870, by U.S. President Grant, who decided they needed some kind of weather monitoring, weather forecasts for the War Department, for the military purposes. And from there, the agency, went through the years and grew in size. Of course, you see some pictures here from the 1920s and then the 1940s. And of course, not only did the agency grow, but the equipment itself became more technologically advanced and more sophisticated. Certainly, the war efforts with work that was being done with radars was a big step forward. And then you step forward into the 60s and 70s and 80s, kind of the period that when I came into the agency, things took on a little bit more of a look. We still didn't have a lot of color, if you will, but we had these larger computer systems that we could, do some crude weather tracking and look at computer models and actually do forecasts for our specific area. Some of the older radars you can see on the bottom right is equipment that I used even into the 90s, where we could, see where storms were at and had to kind of by hand plot down geographic locations and say what type of storm or what intensity storm was at the different locations. And then as you got into the 90s, when quote our modernization took place, the National Weather Service opened up a lot more forecast offices, built some new facilities, put in these fancy Doppler radar systems that we're still using today, and started introducing color and the capability to store a lot more weather information. So of course today's weather service is nothing like it was 20 or 30 years ago, even when I started. Very advanced, thousands and thousands of types of graphics that we can look at, radar data that can really give us insights into what storm behavior is, a lot different communication, social media aspects. So boy, a lot has changed, with computing powers through the year, but just the way that we operate and communicate, it's come a long ways and has really become quite advanced. Now, our agency, of course, has a vision to build what we call a weather-ready nation, which is basically trying to get society prepared and responding correctly to, these things about the weather hazards and water, climate-dependent events, if you will. Trying to make communities as resilient as we can, because of course we can't stop the weather, but we can try to get people as prepared for it as much as we can. And our overall mission, of course, when you get back to the Department of Commerce idea, is to provide this weather, water, and climate data, including forecasts and warnings for the protection of life and property, and the enhancement of the national economy. And when you talk about life and property, the protection of life and property, that's really kind of that meat and potatoes of what drives our agency. So when you start looking at how we're set up as an agency, again, there are national centers we'll talk about, there are river forecast centers, there are field offices or forecast offices like the one here in La Crosse, tsunami warning centers, you name it. So like I said, 100 and roughly 84, 186 facilities stretching from coast to coast, ocean to ocean, Hawaii, Alaska, all the way out in the Pacific. So there is a lot of, again, local touch and reach across the whole United States. Now, when you talk about national centers, these are the groups that kind of support the field offices in numerous different ways, whether it be our main weather prediction center areas out in the Washington, D.C. area, or the Storm Prediction Center, which is busy tonight down in Norman, Oklahoma, our Tropical Hurricane Center or National Hurricane Center down in Florida. And then, you talk about tsunamis and space weather, aviation. We have these different national centers that support all the weather and field offices that are out there. Here are some looks at some of those national centers, the Aviation Weather Center in the upper left, the Hurricane Center, National Hurricane Center in the lower left, the Storm Prediction Center in the upper right, and the Space Weather Prediction Unit that is in the bottom right there. So kind of a look at the national centers, a much different field than what you might experience here at La Crosse, but they're oftentimes looking at a much larger scale, yet supporting the needs for the smaller offices, if you will. We also have what are called river forecast centers. When we start talking about river basins and hydrology concerns, that while some of that is done here locally at the forecast offices, we get a lot of our river forecast information driven from these river forecast centers that have kind of geographic regions, albeit fairly large, covering some of the larger water basins across the United States. This is a look at a typical river forecast center. This is the one up in the Twin Cities area, or the North Central River Forecast Center that covers a lot of our immediate area. And this particular view doesn't look like there's a lot of people there, but there is people in different cubicles in different forecast basins monitoring and predicting river levels. A lot of people don't realize too that we also support the aviation community in numerous ways. Again, not only do we do that locally at the forecast offices, but we also have staff that are embedded, if you will, at the FAA control centers and what we call center weather service units. So within a air traffic control center, and again, they have particular aviation corridors that they work with, we have National Weather Service meteorologists that work closely with the controllers and give them briefings several times a day and let them know, how incoming storms or how weather could impact their aviation operations. And so we work closely with the FAA on having staff available for that. And then, of course, more locally, we have the Weather Forecast Office. And each forecast office has their own counties or parishes of responsibility. Some of them vary in size, but there are roughly 122 weather forecast offices, again, coast to coast and throughout the United States, providing that weather monitoring and forecast for their particular area. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different regions. A lot of these offices are fairly similar in size, but like ours in La Crosse here, they're all open 24 hours a day. Our office here in La Crosse, our forecast office, if fully staffed, would be roughly 23 people. So a forecast office might vary from maybe 20 to maybe as much as 30, depending on the need for it at that office. Our particular office here in La Crosse covers 28 counties and covers 3 states. And you can see some of the duties that we do here. We'll talk about decision support for weather events, but of course, weather monitoring and issuing forecasts, putting out those warnings on a local level or advisories, monitoring local river levels. doing preparedness, and outreach in our local vicinity, doing research and trying to take that science that we learn about all the way to operations so we can continually improve our services, and doing those damage surveys and so on and so on, aviation forecasts. So there's a lot of aspects that we do here locally, but we depend a lot on those other centers, if you will, to support us and to provide us with information. Now, here locally, and like a lot of forecast offices, we have different types of staff members. Of course, we have a meteorologist in charge that kind of runs the particular forecast office. But we have a variety of program managers like myself that handle certain aspects and kind of work with the forecast staff in seeing those through, maybe working with the local community or working with training and that sort of thing. We have a electronics and technology section that keep all the equipment up and running, keep the latest, computer software going and any internal software that we need to load, and so on and so on. Of course, a lot of the core work that is done by our forecast staff, and we have generally about 11 to some offices have maybe as much as 15 or more forecasters that do a lot of that, the kind of the strange hours, if you will, because again, we operate 24 hours a day, monitoring weather conditions, putting out forecasts and warnings as needed. We have electronic technicians, of course, that help keep everything up and running. And then that most important, of course, the administrative assistant that keeps all the paperwork going, the budget, the time and attendance, those kind of things that keep us in function, if you will. So, this is kind of a look at our staff, if we are fully staffed, and the different types of positions that generally are needed here to keep all of these functions and services going in our particular area. Now, we kind of move back a step to this national look. We talk about our different observational networks. The National Weather Service operates and sometimes maintains buoys, and certainly uses the information from these buoys out in the Gulf and different areas of the ocean. We maintain a lot of these automated weather observation systems or weather stations that you see at some of the airports. We've got our Doppler radar systems out there, of course. We have networks of what we call cooperative observers. And these are just people in your communities that are tracking high and low temperatures, rainfall totals for us. It kind of builds the climate backbone of the United States for us. And we also still launch weather balloons. Yes, here in 2021, still launch weather balloons at different sites around the country. So just kind of quickly talking about, again, our radar network. Numerous radars coast to coast, some with better coverage than others, no doubt. And that radar has, been a very powerful tool through the years, put in the late 80s to mid 90s. But here's an example of the Boscobel tornado that occurred in southwest Wisconsin in August of this year, where we can see the actual storm on radar and the tight rotation depicted by these green and red colors right next to each other. But Doppler radars these days can see debris fly in the air if there is a tornado strike. They can oftentimes tell us if it's large hail versus raindrops, snow versus rain, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of information that these radars provide to us that we use in addition to storm spotters and people that are actually trained to see what is happening with the storms. Of course, we have these upper air stations or weather balloon areas that some National Weather Services launch. We do not launch weather balloons here from La Crosse, but they do up at the Twin Cities, over in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and down at Davenport, the Quad Cities, Iowa offices. But this gives us a nice look at the how the atmosphere is set up at least twice a day, coast to coast. We, of course, have networks of satellites out there, and these have come a long way in recent years too, where we might have only had a couple different types of views. A lot of these newer satellites here in the the 2020, 2021 timeframes can give us different types, in this case 16 different kind of slices or views of the atmosphere, looking at how the clouds look, how much ozone, how much water vapor, what temperatures are like in the clouds. And so by using combinations of these things, we can see how things are progressing at night and so on. We get high detail. This is, I don't know how well this will load this is animation via the webinar, but this is a view from a couple days ago of just high-res thunderstorms starting to develop down over Illinois and Indiana. The white areas that you see here through this area, and you can see just the fine detail of all these different clouds that we can see. And even some of the smoke that we've had in this summer, this is kind of a look at where some of these brighter white colors you see in the center of the graphic here are just clouds, but you notice a lot of this more shaded grays around here and swirls in it, the thicker smoke that was coming towards us from the atmosphere. So again, satellites giving us a huge variety of views from space, if you will, both day and night. Now, of course, that's some of the observational equipment, but when we talk about how we interact here locally, we can't forget, some of our really close-knit partners, whether that be dispatch centers, storm spotters, our friends in the broadcast media, but also our emergency management officials. We work closely with those local emergency operations centers, emergency management directors, whether it be on a county or a state level. And being an office that works with 3 different states, we have very good relationships with folks in Madison for Wisconsin, the St. Paul area for Minnesota, and over in Des Moines at the Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So we are constantly coordinating hazardous weather information and providing support for them. Now, when it talks about, us putting out forecasts and warnings and things like that, this is a great quote that I'm going to read to you here from this essay on the nature of goodness in weather forecasting by Alan Murphy. He said, first, it should be understood that forecasts themselves possess no intrinsic value. They acquire their value through their ability to influence the decisions made by others that use this forecast. So that wasn't word for word exactly there, but the idea is sometimes that we have to kind of translate or make sure that the information is being understood by decision makers so that they can keep people safe. It does no good if you put out information in the weather world, but people don't understand it. They don't know how to use it. And in some ways, don't take any steps to protect themselves. So very important in our agency is this idea called impact-based decision support services. The decision support is the key words there, where again, we have our forecasts and warnings out there. We try to convey the confidence in it. We try to put it into some kind of context that people can use. And we study social scientists' information so that our information can maybe better be used. We build those trusted connections with these partners. We meet with emergency management officials and those that are helping make decisions. We work with them on their exercises. We provide feedback and so on, so that we have this kind of trusted relationship before weather occurs. And then, of course, those services hopefully end up in an actionable fashion, right? That it makes intelligent sense based on this information to take action. And that could be anywhere from an evacuation when we're talking about incoming hurricanes. It could talk about closing down a county fair for a few hours, all those kinds of things. It could be about moving people to higher ground if we know that there's going to be flooding. So those are all key things. And again, it starts with how do we put the information in a contextual format, use it in that trusted relationship, and so on. Ultimately, hopefully that service is paid its due. So there's these cases where there is well predicted severe weather, like this. This is a case from a severe weather outbreak earlier this year in March, where days out there was this outlook for the possibility of severe weather, and it continued even as the severe weather event got closer and closer, and sure enough, there was some significant weather that occurred in this region. But if we were to just put this graphic out there and not explain exactly what it means and what the potential impacts could be, it really does no good. And so again, we are the ones that kind of put that into the right frame of mind and the right reference material so that decision makers can properly act on it. So this idea of decision support services is very key. You can see some examples kind of on the left-hand side and some of the events that in our area, ranging from things like, big national tractor pulls to these big music and art festivals that we have in our area. It could be county fairs or town festivals. We do, if you weren't familiar with it, we work with a lot of those county officials to sometimes have people on site, but to provide them the information so that they know when to shut it down or when to evacuate, or in a lot of cases, carry on. You're going to have a good night, nice and quiet weather. So we try to be there for that. In some of my final statements here too, I'll just pass along that we have some programs in our agency that we use to help spread the word. We have this Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program where we work with, again, some of our partners. It could be emergency management, it could be the broadcast outlets or the news outlets, people in the healthcare industry, education, tribal nations. They become ambassadors to us, and in turns, we provide them with information now and then, but we work with them so that they can help build their organization or help build their community, again, more resilient, more responsive, and ready. And that's where this word comes out, ready, to help us out and to make everyone as safe as possible. We also have a program called Storm Ready, where we acknowledge counties or communities, or again, particular agencies or businesses that go above and beyond in monitoring weather conditions and alerting their citizens that there is some kind of weather moving through, and having storm spotters and working closely with the National Weather Service. And so we have these what are called Storm Ready recognized counties and communities. So that is out there too, and pretty active in our particular region. So in kind of summary, I just want to summarize, our organization is really for everyone. You're talking about, hundreds of people, but albeit a relatively small agency of very dedicated people, very mission focused, versatile. In other words, we can change when we need to, and advancing. We're always learning new things and using this technology as much as we can. Another way to look at it, again, is some of these core principles that we have in our roadmap, if you will, that we are dedicated to the science-based service of our nation. We try to produce the best forecast possible and use that information to reduce impact. We don't do this alone either. We can't do this in a vacuum. We need the teamwork of partners, and that could be storm spotters. It could be our friends in the broadcast media and emergency management officials. And by all means, we're always trying to improve, as I said, what we do with the engineering and science of this to make our overall performance that much better. So hopefully that gives you a better perspective of what our agency is about. I will say there are ways to help us out and get involved. Many of you do already. I just can recognize some of the names of the attendees tonight. But becoming a storm spotter helps us out. It not only helps your community, but it also helps us out in the National Weather Service by giving us more ground truth confirmation of what is occurring. There's other programs out there like the Community Collaboration Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, or COCARAS, as is pronounced, where you can daily report in your rain or snow totals and any hazardous weather that you've experienced, and that information is used by the entire weather community. There is some free apps out there called MPing, is kind of a crowdsourcing technique where if you experience rain or you're getting snow or freezing drizzle and report it, we look at those observations, and it helps us verify what we're seeing on radar. It helps us verify if maybe certain precipitation has switched over to a certain type and that sort of thing. And if you've got your own weather station, you can share that weather data online. There's this, again, a website that you can go out there called Citizen Weather Observer Program, or CWOP, CWOP, and you can learn how to share your weather station data on there. That's, again, proved very helpful to the entire weather community. So there are certainly ways to get involved. On our websites. You can find ways to submit storm reports as well. But just sharing your weather information, whether it be kind of official or just what you're observing, is always helpful to our particular agency. So that is all I have prepared here tonight. I'm sure you'll appreciate the shorter webinar versus a longer one. But I hope that you got something out of that and gives you kind of a perspective of what, again, the agency as a whole is all about. If you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in or in the question bar or chat bar on the GoToWebinar interface controller there, and I can certainly try to answer those. Otherwise, I wish you all a good evening.